Nadia had already made up her mind before Damien finished his sentence. She was standing in the middle of the park hall, surrounded by people she had known for years, people she had cooked for, healed, comforted, and stood beside through every hard season. The candles were lit. The long wooden tables were full. It was supposed to be a celebration of the spring gathering, the one night each year where even the lowest-ranked members of the pack sat at the same table as the alpha. She had spent 2 days preparing food for it. Her hands still smelled faintly of herbs and warm bread. And Damien stood at the head of the table, looking at her like she was a problem he had finally decided to deal with. He was tall, broad, and sure of himself in the way that men are when they have never once been told no. His jaw was sharp, his voice was deep, and for 5 years, Nadia had believed that the care she saw in his eyes was real. She had believed it so fully that she had never once allowed herself to question it. She wished, in that moment, that she had questioned it sooner. "You are a good woman," Damien said, and somehow that hurt more than if he had said nothing at all. "But good is not enough. Not for what I need. Not for who I need to be." The hall was very quiet. Not the soft, respectful quiet of people giving space to a private moment. It was the stiff, uncomfortable quiet of people who did not know where to look because they were watching something they did not want to witness and could not bring themselves to stop watching. Nadia kept her eyes on him. She did not look at the others. She had learned long ago that looking at a crowd in a moment like this only made it worse. It turned a wound into a performance. "Her name is Celeste," Damien continued. He said the name with a kind of warmth that Nadia had once believed was reserved for her. "She comes from the Northern Highland line. Her family has held alliances with 3 major packs for generations. She is exactly what this pack needs at its side." One of the older women near the back of the hall made a sound that was almost a protest. Nadia heard it but did not turn. She was doing a calculation. Not an emotional one. A practical one. She was thinking about what she had, what she owed, and what she would need to walk out of this hall and never come back. She had 34 silver coins saved in a cloth pouch under the loose board in the kitchen. She had a travel cloak that was warm enough for the mountain passes. She had strong legs and a good sense of direction. She had a skill with plant-based medicine that a woman named Oren had taught her when she was 14, a skill she had quietly built on for years, mostly out of curiosity, partly because the pack's official healer was old and overworked and Nadia could not stand to watch people suffer when she knew how to help. She had enough. Damien was still talking. Something about the future of the pack, about strength and legacy, about the kind of woman who could stand beside an alpha and command respect. Nadia let the words move past her without landing. They were not for her. They had never really been for her. She thought about the 5 years she had given this place. The winters she had spent preserving herbs so the pack would have medicine through the cold months. The mornings she had woken before the sun to help the older members who struggled with the cold. The times she had sat with grieving families and said nothing because sometimes saying nothing was the right thing to say. She had not done any of it for Damien. She understood that now. She had done it because it was the right thing to do, and because she was, at her core, a person who could not walk past the problem she had the power to fix. That had nothing to do with him. That was hers. And he could not take it. When Damien finally fell silent, he looked at her with something that might have been guilt if he had been a different kind of man. On him, it looked more like mild discomfort. Like he had expected her to cry or argue, and her stillness was inconveniencing him. "I hope you understand," he said. "I do," Nadia said. Her voice came out calm and even, which surprised her. She had expected it to shake. It did not shake. She nodded once, the way you nod when a conversation is finished and you are the one who has decided it is finished. Then she turned and walked out of the hall. Behind her, she heard the noise of the room slowly return to life. She heard someone laugh, sharp and short, the way people laugh when tension breaks and they do not know what else to do. She heard Damien say something to the man beside him, and she heard the man respond with a chuckle, and she did not allow herself to wonder what had been said. She went to the kitchen. She retrieved the cloth pouch from under the loose board. She packed a single bag with the things she needed most: her medicine roll, 2 changes of clothing, her mother's old bone comb, a small knife, and the dried provisions she had been quietly setting aside for a trip she had never consciously admitted she was planning. She wrapped herself in her travel cloak. She stepped out through the back door, into the cool night air, into the dark that sat between the park buildings and the tree line, and she walked toward the trees without looking back. The forest received her the way it always had. Without ceremony. Without judgment. Just the quiet sound of her own footsteps on soft ground, the smell of pine and damp earth, and the slow, solid feeling of moving forward. She did not know where she was going. She knew only that she was going, and that the going was the most important thing. Somewhere behind her, in the warm light of the hall, Damien was celebrating. Probably already forgetting she had ever stood in that room at all. Probably already telling the story of her exit in a way that made him look like the reasonable one. Nadia pulled her cloak tighter and kept walking. She was not angry. She would be, later, in small, manageable bursts that she would process and set aside. But right now she was something else. Something quieter and more focused. She was decided. And sometimes that is the most powerful thing a person can be. The night was long. Her feet ached before she cleared the first mountain pass. She stopped once, near a frozen stream, to drink and rest and eat a small piece of dried bread from her pack. She sat on a flat rock and looked up at the sky, which was very clear and full of stars, and she let herself feel the fear for exactly 1 minute. Then she packed the fear away, the way she packed everything that did not serve her, and she stood up and kept moving. By morning, she had crossed into neutral territory. The pack lands were behind her. No one from Damien's pack had followed. She had not expected them to. She was alone in the most complete way she had ever been alone in her life. And for the first time in 5 years, she felt something that it took her a long time to recognize. She felt free. The border town of Colwyn was not a place that inspired hope at first sight. It sat in a narrow valley between 2 mountain ridges, the kind of place the wind hit from every direction and the mud never fully dried. The buildings were old and patched, held together with rope and habit. The people who lived there were the kind who had, for one reason or another, been passed over by the rest of the world. Former pack members who had left or been removed. Traders who walked the rough roads that better merchants avoided. Healers and midwives and bonesetters who served anyone willing to pay, regardless of which pack they came from. It was exactly the kind of place where a woman alone with a medicine roll and 34 silver coins could disappear and start again. Nadia arrived on a grey morning with blisters on both feet and a quietness in her chest that she had decided to treat as resolve rather than fear. She found a room above a tanner's workshop for 3 coins a week. It smelled strongly of the leather work below and the window faced the wall, but it had a lock on the door, and that was enough. She spent the first 3 days learning the town. She did not introduce herself to anyone. She walked the market rows, she noted which stalls sold medicinal plants and which sold counterfeits. She found the healer's workshop near the eastern gate and stood outside long enough to understand that the woman who ran it was elderly, exhausted, and handling more patients than she could reasonably manage alone. On the 4th day, she went inside. The healer's name was Oren. Not the same Oren who had taught Nadia as a child, but the name made Nadia feel, for a brief and irrational moment, that she was in the right place. The old woman looked her over with sharp eyes and asked 3 questions. Could she identify Wolfsbane from Mountain Crowfoot at a distance? Had she ever set a broken bone without instruction? And was she willing to work nights? Nadia answered yes to all 3. She started the following morning. The work was hard in a way that had nothing to do with skill. It was the weight of it. People came to the healer's workshop in pain, in fear, in states of loss that sat in the air like something physical. Soldiers from the border skirmishes who had wounds that had begun to turn bad because they had waited too long before seeking help. Women who had made long journeys on foot to reach someone who would help them without demanding pack affiliation. Children with fevers that their parents could not name. Nadia treated them all. She worked steadily and carefully and without the kind of force that made frightened people feel more frightened. She learned quickly what she did not already know. When she did not know something, she said so, and then she found out. She sent a portion of her wages to a settlement 3 valleys over that housed orphaned wolf cubs from the border conflicts. She had heard about it in the market and had thought about it for one evening before deciding that people who had more than they needed and did less with it than they could were choosing smallness, and she was not interested in choosing smallness. The months passed. Winter came hard and then broke slowly. And the thing that Nadia had not expected, had not planned for or anticipated, began to happen. People started asking for her specifically. Not the old healer. Her. It started with a group of border scouts who came in after a particularly bad night engagement. One of them had a wound in his shoulder that had been treated twice already by pack healers and had not improved. Nadia looked at it for a long time, asked the man several questions about how it felt and when it changed, and then made a compound that was not in any standard medicine role. It was something she had worked out herself over the past several months, combining 2 things she had read about in the healer's old books and 1 thing she had observed in the way certain plants grew near contaminated soil. The scout's shoulder healed in 4 days. He came back the following week with 3 companions. The word moved the way word always moves in small places, quietly and then all at once. They came from pack settlements she had never heard of. Traders brought her name along their routes the way they brought other useful information, folded into conversation without ceremony. An elder from a river park 3 days sent a messenger to ask if she would consider a seasonal position. She sent back a polite refusal, because she was not ready to belong to anyone's structure again, but she thought about the messenger for a long time after he left. There was something else happening, something that Nadia noticed and kept very private. There were moments during healings, particularly the difficult ones, where something happened that she could not fully explain. The compound would work faster than it should have. A fever that had been climbing for 2 days would break within hours of her presence. A child who had not responded to standard treatment would begin to improve the morning after Nadia sat with her through the night. She did not call it anything. She did not speak about it. She filed it away under the same category as things she did not yet understand, and she kept walking. Old Oren noticed. Of course she did. She was elderly and tired, but she was not dull. You have something, the old woman told her one evening, when the workshop was empty and they were cleaning instruments together. I have treated people for 41 years and I know what skill looks like and I know what this is. This is something else. I don't know what it is, Nadia said honestly. Neither do I, Oren said. But I would not ignore it. Nadia did not ignore it. She began to pay more careful attention to the moments when it happened, the conditions, the state of her mind, the nature of the patient's condition. She kept a small journal, written in her own shorthand that no one else could read, tracking what she observed. She was not trying to become exceptional. She was not trying to become anything. She was simply a woman who paid attention to what was real and acted on what she knew, and something real was happening, and she intended to understand it. Colwyn began to feel, not like home exactly, but like a place where she was doing what she was meant to do. And then one late autumn evening, as the first snow of the season was settling over the valley, a cloaked figure arrived at the workshop door. He was tall, very still, and wore no pack markings. His cloak was plain dark wool, but the fabric was too fine for a traveler and the way he held himself suggested a lifetime of training. He asked for Nadia by name. Not the healer. Not the medicine woman. Nadia. Her exact name. She looked at him steadily. Who sent you? He reached into his cloak and produced a small circular seal. He held it toward the lamp so she could see it. The workshop went very quiet. Even old Oren, who was near the back shelving supplies, became still. The seal was black with silver edging. Nadia did not know every noble house seal in the territories, but she knew this one, because every person who had ever passed through Colwyn knew this one. It was carried only by personal representatives of one man. The most feared Alpha King in 4 territories. The man named Caius. He is dying, the cloaked man said. And his healers have run out of answers. Your name came up 3 separate times across 3 separate sources. He would like to request your presence. Nadia looked at the seal. She looked at the man. She thought about the patient she had scheduled for the next morning, and about old Oran's bad knees, and about the journal of observations sitting under her bed, half filled with questions she had not yet answered. Then she thought about a man, somewhere distant, who was dying while his people ran out of options. "I will need to pack," she said. "Give me an hour." The ride to Kaiser's stronghold took 4 days. Nadia spent most of those 4 days watching the land change outside the carriage window. She had never traveled this far east before. The terrain shifted gradually from the familiar pine-heavy mountain country she had grown up into something wider and starker, rolling plains cut through with deep river gorges, old stone bridges that looked like they had been standing since before anyone alive could remember who built them. The cloaked man, whose name she eventually learned was Fon, told her very little about what to expect. He answered her medical questions readily enough. The king had been weakened by a venom, origin unknown, delivered through a wound he had received in what was described, vaguely, as a border enforcement action. His pack healers had identified the venom's effects but could not isolate the compound or determine the correct antidote. He had been declining for 11 days. "How far has it progressed?" Nadia asked. "His left side is partially unresponsive," Fon said. "He is feverish but lucid. He has refused anything that causes loss of consciousness." "That will make treatment harder," Nadia said. "Everything about him makes things harder," Fon said, and it was the first time she heard anything resembling human feeling in his voice. It sounded like affection. The complicated kind that people feel for someone they respect but cannot easily like. The stronghold appeared on the morning of the 4th day, rising out of the plains like something the land had made on its own rather than something humans had built. It was enormous, ancient, and entirely without ornament. No flags. No decorative stonework. No attempt to impress. Just mass and height and the kind of permanence that made other structures look temporary. Nadia stepped out of the carriage and stood looking at it for a moment. She was not nervous. She was aware that she probably should be, given what she was walking into. She examined the absence of nervousness and decided it was not bravery and not foolishness. It was focus. There was a patient inside those walls who needed help, and she was the person who had come to help him, and everything else could be sorted out afterward. She followed Fon inside. The corridors were wide and clean and very quiet. The people they passed moved with the particular efficiency of people who had learned that unnecessary movement attracted attention they did not want. Everyone looked at Nadia, and then looked away. Not in the dismissive way she was used to being looked at in Damien's park, where she had been looked past more often than looked at. This was different. This was the look of people trying to figure out what she was and where she fit. She did not try to help them figure it out. They brought her to a set of heavy doors on the 3rd floor. Fon knocked once. A guard on the inside opened it without a word. She went in. The room was large and full of natural light from a row of narrow windows on the far wall. There was very little furniture. A white bed, dark wood, no decoration. A table with medical instruments that someone had laid out with care. A chair near the window. And in the bed, King Caius. She had heard descriptions of him, the way you hear descriptions of powerful people, assembled from rumor and reverence and the exaggerated language of people who wanted to seem important by association. She had filed those descriptions away as unreliable. What she saw now was a man. A man who was very clearly unwell, which mattered more to her than anything else about him. He was watching her from the moment she entered. His eyes were dark and fully alert, which was one good sign. His collar was poor and his left hand rested strangely against the blanket, the finger slightly curled in a way that suggested reduced sensation. The fever sweat on his forehead was controlled but present. He did not speak. She walked to the bedside, set down her medicine roll, and looked at him the way she looked at all her patients. Directly, without performance, taking inventory. "I am going to ask you some questions," she said. "I need you to answer them honestly, not in a way that makes you seem stronger than you are. The accuracy of your answers affects the accuracy of my treatment." There was a pause. From behind her, she sensed Fon going very still, the way people go still when they expect something to explode. Caius said, "Ask." His voice was rougher than she had expected, lower and slightly worn at the edges, which was the fever's effect on his throat. But it was steady. He had control of it. She asked him 12 questions. About the timing and location of the original wound. About the exact progression of his symptoms. About what he had been given and in what order. About his sensitivity to pain in different areas. About his sleep and his ability to regulate his body temperature. About the specific character of the fever, whether it climbed steadily or spiked and dropped. He answered all 12 without deflection. When he did not know the precise answer to something, he said so and then gave her the closest approximation he could. He did not minimize. He did not perform. When she was finished with her questions, she spent 20 minutes examining him directly, checking the wound site, checking his reflexes on both sides, testing the temperature distribution across his skin. When she straightened up and turned to her medicine roll, Kaya said, "Well, it is a compound venom," she said. 2 substances, not 1. Your healers were working from the wrong baseline because they identified the primary agent correctly and stopped there. The secondary agent is what is causing the neurological effects. It needs to be cleared first, before the primary agent can be fully treated. If you clear the primary agent first, the secondary compound bonds to the remaining tissue and becomes permanent. The room was very quiet. "Can you clear it?" Kayas asked. "Yes," Nadia said. "It will take 3 days of treatment. The process is not comfortable. I have been not comfortable for 11 days. This will be different," she said. "I need your cooperation and I need you not to try to manage through the discomfort in ways that contradict my instructions. What I am about to do is precise. Your body will resist some of it. You need to let me work without interference." Another pause. Longer this time. "All right," Kaya said. She began. The first compound she made took 40 minutes to prepare. She worked at the side table, laying out her ingredients with the focus of someone who had done this enough times that her hands knew the work without her having to direct them consciously. She was aware that there were 3 guards in the room who were watching her with the particular quality of attention that people give to someone they are not sure they trust. She did not acknowledge them. Their trust was not a requirement for her to do her job. She was also aware that Kayas was watching her. Not the way the guards were watching her. The guards were watching her the way you watch a potential risk. Kayas was watching her the way someone watches something that has surprised them and they are trying to understand why. She did not address it. She finished preparing the first compound, brought it to him, explained what it would do and what he would likely feel over the next several hours, and administered it. Then she pulled the chair close to the bed, sat down, and began to monitor. The first hour was the hardest to watch. The compound moved through his system doing what it was meant to do, which involved his body responding to that process with considerable discomfort. His jaw was tight. His breathing was controlled in the way that people control their breathing when the alternative is making noise they do not want to make. He did not ask her to stop. He did not ask for something else. He looked at the ceiling and breathed and let it happen. She respected that more than she had expected to. At one point, around the second hour, he turned his head and looked at her. "You have done this before," he said. Not a question. "Not this exact treatment," she said. "But I have treated compound venoms. And I have sat with people through hard processes." "You are not afraid of me," he said. "You are sick," she said. "That is what I see." He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked back at the ceiling. "Most people who come into this room are afraid of me," he said. "It makes them perform. They say what they think I want to hear. It is very tiring." "I imagine it is," she said. He almost smiled. Not quite. But the edge of something was there. "Your name is Nadia," he said. "Yes." "How did you end up at a border town?" She thought about the question for a moment. Not about whether to answer. About how to answer accurately and without more detail than the situation required. "I made a decision," she said. "To leave a place that was no longer working. And that is where I ended up. He did not ask for more. He seemed to understand that what she had offered was a complete answer, not an incomplete one. By the end of the second day of treatment, the partial unresponsiveness in his left side had significantly improved. By the end of the third day, his fever had broken. On the morning of the fourth day, Nadia packed her medicine roll with the systematic care she always packed it. She rolled each tool precisely. She checked that every container was sealed. She made notes in her journal about the case, the specific compound ratios that had worked, what she would adjust if she faced something similar in the future. She was just tightening the strap on her bag when the door opened and Caius walked in. Not walked. That was the wrong word. He moved the way very few people move, with total awareness of the space around him and no wasted motion, and no visible effort, which was remarkable given that 3 days ago he had been barely able to sit upright without assistance. He looked at her bag. "You are leaving," he said. "My work here is finished," she said. "You are well?" He said nothing for a moment. He was looking at her with the same expression she had seen on his face during the treatment, the one that suggested she was a variable he had not accounted for and was still trying to place. "Stay," he said. It was not a command. She had heard him give commands, twice, during the treatment, when he had needed something from the guards. This did not sound like that. It sounded like something he was not entirely sure he had the right to say. She looked at him. She thought about old Oren's bad knees and her morning patients and the journal half full of observations and questions. She thought about the last time a man had said something to her in a tone that surprised her, and how different that had felt from this. "Why?" she asked. He considered the question with the same seriousness he had given all her medical questions. "Because you are the first person in a very long time who has been in this room with me and behaved entirely like themselves." Nadia looked at her bag. She looked at the windows, at the grey-light plains beyond them. "I will need my own workspace," she said. "And I will not be available during patient hours for anything that is not a medical emergency." Caius nodded once. "And I will continue my work. Whatever patients come to me." "Agreed," he said. She set her bag down. Not because of who he was. Not because of his power or his reputation or the stronghold around her or the fact that 3 territories deferred to his name. She set it down because he had answered her questions honestly and let her do her work without interference and said please without saying the word at all, and those were, in her experience, the things that actually mattered. She could not have known, in that moment, what the following months would bring. She could not have known about the Interpack Summit in the spring. About the great hall full of alphas and their chosen companions. About the moment she would turn around in a crowd and see a face from her past, a face she had not thought about in months, and feel almost nothing. She could not have known that the man behind her, at that moment, would place his hand at the small of her back with the quiet certainty of someone who had decided, in their own time and their own way, exactly where they stood. She could not have known any of it. She only knew that she had made a decision. Again. The way she made all her decisions, clearly, without drama, based on what was in front of her and what she knew to be true. She stayed. The Interpack Summit was held every spring in the neutral city of Veldrat. Veldrat was old money and old stone, the kind of city that had been wealthy for so long that wealth had become invisible there, absorbed into the architecture and the manners and the particular way that powerful people greeted each other when they already knew exactly where everyone stood. The Summit Hall was a high-ceilinged building of grey granite near the city center, ringed by smaller meeting rooms and private dining spaces, and every spring it filled with the most powerful people in 4 territories and their delegations and their rivalries and their carefully maintained faces. Caius had not attended in 3 years. He had sent representatives, because the summit required at least token participation from every ruling house, and Caius was many things but he was not careless. He had simply found, over the years, that his presence at large gatherings of rival alphas produced a particular quality of tension that he did not enjoy and saw no reason to subject himself to more often than necessary. This year was different. He told Fon first, which was his habit. Fon received the information the way he received most information, with a stillness that could mean anything and then a single practical question. "Will you be bringing anyone?" Fun asked. Caius thought about it for exactly 1 second. Yes. He told Nadia that evening, in the east corridor near the workshop she had claimed as her own over the past several months and gradually filled with a system of organization that only she fully understood. She was at her work table, writing. She looked up when he stopped in the doorway. There is a summit in Veldrat next month, he said. I am attending this year. I would like you to come. She studied him for a moment. As your healer? As my companion, he said. Though if someone is injured you are welcome to treat them. There was a brief pause. Not an uncomfortable one. The pauses between them had never really been uncomfortable. They had figured out, over the months, that they were both people who thought before they spoke and that the space between sentences was not awkward silence but simply thought being given room. All right, she said, and went back to her writing. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he left. She did not own anything designed for a summit. The clothes she had arrived with were practical and worn, and she had replaced them over the months with equally practical things that suited her work. She had not thought about it much. She had not had reason to. 2 weeks before the summit, 3 boxes arrived at her workshop door. Dark fabric, she discovered when she opened them, in the deep colors that were associated with the king's house. Not elaborate. Not designed to make her into something she was not. Clean lines, good material, clothes that would hold up over a long day without requiring constant attention. There was no note. She did not need one. She chose what to bring with the same efficiency she chose everything. She packed what she needed and left behind what she did not, and on the morning of departure she stood in the inner courtyard in the dark blue traveling coat and waited beside the carriages with the same composure she brought to everything. Caius came out of the main doors and crossed the courtyard toward her. He looked at her once in the way that meant he had registered something and was filing it, and then he looked at Fawn and said something about the route, and they got in the carriages, and that was that. The city of Veldrat received them on a clear spring morning. The streets were clean and the air smelled of early blossoms and the faint mineral sharpness of the river that ran through the city's eastern quarter. Nadia sat at the carriage window and watched it all with the quiet attention she gave to new places, cataloguing and considering. The summit hall came into view as they rounded the main avenue. Even from the outside, she could see the other delegations, the carriages bearing house colors, the clusters of attendants and advisors. The controlled bustle of powerful people arranging themselves in relation to each other. She did not feel out of place. She had, she realized, stopped feeling out of place somewhere in the middle of the winter at the stronghold, when she had spent 3 weeks working through a particularly complex series of cases and had emerged from it exhausted and satisfied and more certain than ever that she knew what she was doing. They entered the hall together. The effect of Caius walking into a room was something Nadia had observed before, the way sound redistributed itself, the way attention reorganized. It was not that people went silent. It was subtler than that. Conversations shifted in tone. People straightened slightly. The room became more aware of itself. What was different today was that she was beside him. She was not behind him. Not at a respectable remove. She was beside him, at the same pace, and his bearing made it clear that this was intentional. She could feel the readjustment happening in the room, the collective calculation of who she was and what her presence beside him meant. She let them calculate. She was looking at the room, noting its layout, identifying the refreshment tables, assessing exits as she always assessed exits in unfamiliar spaces, when she heard it. A laugh. She knew the laugh before she identified the face. It was a particular kind of laugh, the sound of a man performing amusement for an audience, making sure the people around him understood that he found something funny so that they would find it funny too. She turned. Damien was standing with a group of 3 men near the center of the hall. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps she had simply stopped carrying the memory of his height with her, and he was dressed in the fine colors of his Pax house, which had improved considerably in the months since his alliance with Celeste's family. He looked prosperous and confident and entirely at home. He was laughing at her. Not at her directly. He was laughing and tilting his head in her direction, saying something to the men beside him, and she could not hear what it was, but the shape of the moment was clear. He had seen her. He had not yet recognized who she was walking beside, because he had not yet looked fully at her companion. He had only seen her, in a clean dark coat, and he had found it amusing. She saw the exact moment it changed. His eyes slid from her to Caius, with the trained instinct of a man who had spent years reading pack hierarchies and power structures. And then something happened in his face that she had never seen there before. The laugh stopped. Not faded. Stopped. As if someone had cut a wire. His body followed a half-second later. He went still in the way people go still when they have made a calculation and the result has come back wrong. The men beside him noticed and looked to where he was looking and went through their own versions of the same process. Caius was not looking at Damien. He was looking at the far end of the hall where the summit's hosting alpha was approaching to offer formal greeting. Nadia was looking at Damien. She did not feel the rush of heat she might have expected. She had, on certain nights in the months after Call 1, imagined what it might feel like to be seen by him in a context like this. She had imagined it would feel like victory, which she had never fully trusted as a feeling worth pursuing. What she felt now was much quieter than victory. She felt the specific peace of a person who has moved far enough forward that looking back requires real effort, and the view, when you make the effort, is simply smaller than you expected. Damien took a half step toward her. Not a confident step. A step that had not decided yet what it intended. One of Caius's personal guard, a quiet man who had been trailing their position by exactly 4 paces since they entered the hall, moved forward. He did not touch Damien. He did not speak. He simply moved, and his positioning made it clear that any further movement in that direction would require an explanation. Damien stopped. Nadia turned back toward Caius, who had just finished exchanging words with the hosting alpha and had turned back toward her with the particular quality of attention she had learned to recognize as his version of checking in. "There is someone here you know," he said. It was not a question. "There is someone here I used to know," she said. Caius looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded and said nothing further, and the conversation moved on, and they walked together to the east end of the hall where the formal introductions would begin. Behind her, she heard nothing from Damien. She had expected to feel the absence of his presence behind her the way she had once felt it, heavily, with the weight of what had been and what had ended. She felt it the way you feel the absence of a stone you have set down after carrying it for a long time. With the mild surprise that it had ever been as heavy as it was. The summit's formal dinner took place in the great hall that evening. Long tables had been arranged end to end down the center of the room, set with the particular care that powerful households gave to meals they intended to be noticed. Candles in iron holders. Good linen. Wine from the western valleys. Nadia sat beside Caius at the head table, which she had not asked for and which caused a visible recalibration among several people who had made assumptions about where she would be seated. She ate calmly and spoke when she was addressed, which was more often than she had expected. Several of the other Alpha's companions were curious about her, with the careful, probing curiosity of people who have learned to dress their assessments in social clothing. She answered honestly and without elaboration. She found that this approach tended to confuse people who were expecting her to perform, and the confusion brought her a comfortable degree of quiet. She was aware of Damien across the room. Not watching him. Aware. The way you are aware of a weather pattern, not because it affects you but because it is there. Midway through the meal, Celeste, his high-born companion, said something. She said it to the woman beside her, not to Nadia directly, and it was delivered with the kind of precision that makes things hard to formally object to. Something about women who arrived from border territories and the interesting variety of ambitions people could develop. The kind of sentence that is a blade with a rounded handle. The table heard it. Tables always hear things. That is what tables are for. Nadia set down her fork and reached for her water glass. Caius said, very quietly, 6 words. She did not catch all 6 because she was not fully attending. She caught the last 3, not again tonight. It was not a threat. It was not loud enough to be a performance. It was said in the voice of someone who is clarifying an expectation once and has no intention of repeating himself. Celeste went very pale. The table's attention redistributed itself, quickly, to safer subjects. The dinner continued. No one said anything further about border territories or interesting ambitions. Nadia looked at Caius. He was eating. He did not look particularly satisfied with himself, which was one of the things she had come to notice about him. He did not perform his own power. He just exercised it and moved on. You did not have to do that, she said, quietly enough that only he could hear. I know, he said. She thought about what he had said in the East Corridor at the Stronghold, months ago. I did not do it for you. I did it because he was disrespecting someone in my presence. There is a difference. She understood the difference. She thought about Damien standing in the park hall 5 years ago with his reasonable voice and his reasonable words, explaining why she was not enough. She thought about what it had felt like to be told your value by someone who did not understand your value and had not tried to. She thought about what it felt like now, sitting beside a man who had not told her value once. Who had simply acted, consistently, from a position of having already determined it. She picked up her fork and continued eating. After the dinner, when the delegations were dispersing to their various quarters and the hall was emptying in the slow, deliberate way of events that important people do not want to be seen rushing away from, Nadia stepped out onto a side corridor balcony for air. The night was clear. The city below was lit with the warm light of lanterns, and from this high she could see the river, a dark ribbon catching the moon. She heard footsteps and knew them without turning. Caius stood beside her and looked at the city. He was the one who rejected you, he said. Not a question. Yes, she said. I thought so, he said. He has been looking at you all evening with the expression of a man who has realized he lost something he did not know he had. I am not a thing to lose, she said. No, Caius said. You are not. They stood in silence for a while. It was not an empty silence. It was the kind of silence that two people stand in when there is more to say and neither of them is in a hurry to say it wrong. Below them, the city continued its evening. Somewhere in the hall behind them, Damien was likely explaining to Celeste what had happened. Likely finding a version of the evening that made him the one who had chosen to stay back rather than the one who had been stopped by a guard with a look. Likely constructing a narrative in which Nadia's presence beside the king was a coincidence or a temporary arrangement or something that did not mean what it obviously meant. She did not need to hear it. She did not need to correct it. The version of her life that was real did not require his understanding of it. She had come to Cowan alone with 34 coins and a medicine roll and a decision not to let one man's small estimation of her become her estimation of herself. She had worked in the dark and in the cold and in the exhausting weight of other people's pain, and she had done it with the focus and the steadiness that were, she had finally come to accept, simply her nature. She had not set out to be here. She had set out to be herself. And being herself had led her here, step by honest step. Damien had looked at her years ago and seen the limits of his own imagination. The man standing beside her now had looked at her, feverish and watching from a sickbed, and seen something worth asking to stay. She turned from the railing. I should sleep, she said. I have a patient to check on in the morning. She had agreed, 2 days ago, to consult on a joint issue that one of the summit's hosting staff had been managing poorly for months. It was not glamorous. She did not care. Caius looked at her. Of course, he said. She walked back toward the corridor. At the doorway, she paused. Caius, she said. He looked at her. Thank you, she said. For tonight. He shook his head once. You did not need me to. I know, she said. That is what makes it worth thanking. She went inside. Behind her, the night city continued its lantern-lit life, unhurried and unaware. And somewhere in the hall's quieting rooms, a man named Damien sat with his expensive wine and his high-born companion and the specific discomfort of a person who has done an accounting and found the numbers do not work in his favor. He would tell himself the story differently by morning. People like him always did. But the truth of the evening, the truth of the woman he had dismissed as ordinary, the truth of where she stood now and who she stood beside, and the absolute ease with which she had looked at him and looked away, that truth was not the kind that could be revised. It had already happened. It was already real. And Nadia had already gone to sleep. The morning after the summit's formal dinner moved differently than the evening had. Nadia woke before the city had fully come to life, which was her habit. She was at her patient consultation before the breakfast arrangements in the summit hall were even set. She spent an hour with a man named Jeffrey, a senior steward of the hosting house, assessing the joint damage in his right knee that had been treated incorrectly twice and was now in a worse state than if it had been left alone. She gave him a precise plan, a compound to apply morning and evening, specific instructions for how to move and not move while it healed, and a realistic timeline. You will be functional by midsummer, she told him. But only if you follow the instructions exactly. Jeffrey thanked her 4 times, which was 3 more times than she needed, and she left him with the compound and the instructions and went to find breakfast. She was sitting in a small side room of the main hall, eating bread and dried fruit and reviewing the notes she had made about Jeffrey's case, when Fawn appeared in the doorway. "Damien has requested a moment with you," he said. She did not look up from her notes. "Did he?" "He sent a formal message through the summit's correspondence service," Fawn said. There was a quality to his voice that suggested he had considered the message for a while before deciding to deliver it. "I am under no instruction to arrange it. I am simply informing you." Nadia set down her bread. She looked at her notes. She looked at the window, which faced the river and the morning light on it. She thought about what she wanted from this encounter. She examined the question carefully, the way she examined all questions that mattered. Not what she was expected to want. Not what would make a satisfying narrative. What she actually wanted. She determined that she did not want anything from it. "Tell him I am busy," she said, and picked up her bread again. Fawn nodded once and left. She finished her breakfast and went back to her notes, and the morning continued, unhurried and clear, the way mornings continued when you had no unfinished business with the past. Later that day, during the summit's formal closing proceedings, she stood beside Caius in the main hall with the assembled alphas and their delegations and listened to the hosting alpha summarize the agreements and intentions that had been negotiated over the previous 2 days. She was aware, with the peripheral attention she gave to things that were present but not pressing, that Damien was across the hall. She was aware that he looked at her more than once. She was aware that each time she noticed, she felt nothing more complicated than the faint acknowledgement of a thing she had already processed and set aside. During the closing reception that followed the formal proceedings, one of the other Alpha's companions, a woman named Harriet with an open face and a dry way of talking, found her way to Nadia's side and struck up a conversation that quickly moved past the formalities of the event and into territory that felt more like 2 people actually talking than 2 people performing conversation. "You are not what I expected," Harriet said, "when I heard Caius was bringing someone." "What did you expect?" Nadia asked. Harriet thought about it honestly, which Nadia appreciated. Someone more deliberate about being seen. Someone who understood this kind of room and was playing it. "I understand the room," Nadia said. "I have chosen not to play it." Harriet looked at her with the expression of someone reassessing. "Is that what you have chosen or is that who you are?" "Both," Nadia said. Harriet smiled. "Then you are exactly right for him," she said, with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who had known Caius long enough to have an informed opinion. "He has been surrounded by performers for 20 years. He is very tired of it." Nadia thought about the sick room. About 12 honest answers to 12 direct questions. About the way he had looked at the ceiling and breathed through the hard hours of treatment without performing his endurance for anyone. "I know," she said. The reception wound down in the particular way of former events that everyone has been ready to leave for an hour but no one wants to be the first to leave. When they finally departed, back through the city streets to the summit accommodations, the evening was settling warm and the lanterns were coming on. Caius walked beside her. They did not talk much. They rarely talked much when talking was not required. It was one of the things she had come to value, the specific relief of being with someone who understood that silence between people was not a failure. She was thinking about going home. home. She tested the word in her mind and found it accurate. The stronghold had become that somewhere over the winter, not through sentiment but through the slow accumulation of a life that fit. Her workshop with its careful system. Her morning rounds. The east corridor where she walked when she needed to think. Fon's precise and economical presence. The fact that people looked at her with straightforward respect and not the complicated mixture of pity and assessment she had been looked at with for much of her previous life. She had not come there looking for a home. She had come there to treat a sick man and then leave. Life had, as it sometimes did, had other intentions. On the last morning in Veldrath, as the delegations were loading their carriages and the city was doing its morning walk around them, Nadia stood in the small courtyard of the summit accommodations and did something she had not done for a long time. She was still. Not the stillness of suppressing feeling, which she had practiced in a park hall a long time ago. Not the stillness of exhaustion. The stillness of a person who has nothing pressing to run from and nothing desperate to move toward, who is simply present in a moment that is exactly what it is. The spring air was cool and clean. The cobblestones were damp from an early mist. She could hear Fon coordinating the carriage arrangement with his usual efficiency behind her. She thought about the woman who had left the park hall in the middle of the night with 34 coins and a medicine roll and a decision she had not fully articulated even to herself. She thought about what that woman had known and had not known. She had known that she could not stay. She had not known where she would go. She had known that she had skills and strength. She had not known how far those things would carry her. She had known, in some part of her that did not use words, that the life she was walking out of was not the life she was meant for. She had not known what the meant for life would look like. She had simply kept moving toward it. And here she was. Not at a destination. She did not think in those terms. Here, in this specific moment, in a clean courtyard in a spring morning in a city she had never seen until 2 days ago, standing beside a life she had built from what had been discarded, doing work that mattered, alongside a man who saw her clearly and said so in the only way that counted, through action, through consistency, through the kind of quiet respect that does not announce itself but is simply always present. Damien had laughed at what she was. She had not been listening. She had already been on her way to something else entirely, and she had not needed his understanding of it in order to get there. Caius came to stand beside her. He looked at the courtyard, the morning, the world. "Ready," he said. She picked up her bag. "Yes," she said. And they walked out into the morning together. Behind her, somewhere in the dispersing crowd of the summit last morning, a man named Damien stood with his regrets and his pride and the particular heavy knowledge of someone who has understood, too late, what he had let go of and why, and what that said about him, and what it would continue to say. He would live with that knowledge. It would not ruin him. Men like him were durable in the ways that kept them from understanding their own smallness. But he would not forget the image of her beside Caius, walking through that summit hall without a backward glance, and the absolute completeness of her, the sense of a person who had been underestimated so thoroughly by so many that the underestimation had simply stopped touching her. He would not forget it. And she would not think about it again. She had a patient to check on when she got home. She had a workshop waiting, with its careful system and its half-filled journal of observations. She had work she was good at and questions she had not yet answered and a life that was, day by day, exactly what she had built it to be. She had more than enough. She had always had more than enough. It had just taken the right amount of distance from the wrong room to see it clearly. Nadia walked forward into the morning and did not look back. The road home was long and clear, and every step of it was hers.